The Capellan Front. Operations Galahad and Thor, 3028. In June 3028, the governments of the Federated Suns and the Lyran Commonwealth announced the details of the scheduled Galahad and Thor maneuvers. As a quote, "so that our peaceful exercises do not provoke any unnecessary concerns among our neighbours." According to Prince Hansa, the information delivered by couriers to the leaders of the other realms was quite explicit, listing affected units, their destinations, and the schedule for returning to their base worlds. The Draconis Combine, the Capellan Confederation, and the Free Worlds League were grateful for the information, feeling the schedule would tip them off if the Fox were up to something. They then watched closely as Operations Galahad and Thor began. Giving such detailed information to often hostile neighbours shocked many in the Commonwealth and Federated Suns. Some leaders feared that the realm's security had been compromised, that one of the other houses would use this information about the exercises as a map for an invasion. A few critics even called the Archon and the Prince either fools or traitors. As it turned out, they were neither. One of the most remarkable things about the Third Operation Galahad was the unprecedented gathering of all 8 Crucis Lancer regimental combat teams, more than 80 regiments on the world of Mira. This massing of troops so near the Capellan Confederation prompted Chancellor Liao to beef up troops in the Tikhonov commonality with local reserves. Nothing more was done in that part of the Confederation because Operation Galahad was also massing troops on Kittery and Zhiliang, threatening Sian. The Lyran Commonwealth's second Operation Thor was much larger than the first, with more than 40 mech regiments participating. This exercise was also broader, involving the entire Combine border. In reaction to the expanded exercises, the Draconis Combine placed its border with the Commonwealth on a slightly higher state of alert, but nothing more. In fact, some Combine troops were removed from the region because of activity along the border with the Federated Suns. The 5 elite regiments of the Wolf's Dragoons had left the Draconis Combine for the Federated Suns after a bitter fight. Many officers in the Galadon military district wanted to punish the mercenaries for defying the dragon, and while Coordinator Takashi Kirito appreciated the eagerness to fight, the departure of the Dragoons' 5 regiments left the Federated Suns' border weak, too vulnerable to give rein to rash action or personal vendetta. The Coordinator feared that the First Prince would exploit the situation by launching an offensive against the Combine. When he saw the itinerary of Operation Galahad would focus on the Capellan border, Takashi Kirito was relieved, because it gave him at least 6 months of peace to reinforce the military district. In fact, he believed his entire realm would be undisturbed for months. He had no fear of the Lyran Commonwealth because both its government and its military were run by Steiners, and the Kiritans knew that Steiners had neither the capability nor the courage to launch an offensive, let alone one against the Draconis Combine. One of the reasons the Combine and Confederation took only minor precautions against the massive maneuvers was because the LCAF and AFFS meticulously followed their schedule. Another reason Coordinator Takashi and Chancellor Liao were not too concerned with Operations Galahad and Thor, though, was because the wedding between Melissa Steiner and Prince Davian was fast approaching. Everyone agreed that no one, not even the Fox, would try something during his own wedding. Everything about Operation Rat had progressed perfectly. Besides making him a happy man, his wedding had created more than enough consternation in the Inner Sphere to cause his adversaries to lower their guard in confusion, allowing Operations Galahad and Thor to position troops for the next step. On August 20th, 3028, Prince Davian stood before the leaders of the other houses and other mighty personages gathered on Terra for his wedding, and toasting his bride, smugly saying the fateful words, "I give you the Capellan Confederation." As the powerful and ambitious lost all decorum and began shouting and stampeding about, Prince Davian watched jubilantly, knowing that there was nothing any of them could do to stop Operation Rat from snapping shut on Maximilian Liao. Jump ships carrying Davian troops were already appearing in 9 Capellan star systems. First Wave. Military authorities had characterized the Capellan Confederation as the weakest and easiest to conquer of the 5 successor states. While the Confederation was the smallest realm and had the fewest battle-mech regiments, there were still important reasons not to invade. One of the most obvious was that the Confederation's compactness made it easy to move reinforcements from quiet sectors to wherever they were needed. Local militia units, while poorly equipped, could not be ignored. Because of the likelihood that many Capellan partisans would be willing to die in the name of Liao, Davian intelligence experts estimated that it would take months or even years to subdue each Capellan world. Prince Hansa felt the prize was worth the risk and expense. The first wave of Operation Rat attacked 9 Capellan worlds simultaneously. The first set of invasions had 2 main objectives in addition to its territorial aims: crippling the Capellan command structure and destroying its more powerful units. The target worlds were chosen to separate Senior Colonel Pavel Rydzik, the commanding officer of the Capellan military, from Chancellor Liao. The prince and his advisors felt that Colonel Rydzik would coordinate the war from his homeworld of Tikhonov, while the Chancellor would return to Sarna. If Operation Rat could physically separate the 2 military planners, they would hope that the stresses of the war might divide Capellan loyalty. The first wave would also pit AFFS troops against 3 of the Capellans' feared House mech regiments: House Ijuri, House Lusan, and House Fujita. With surprise on their side, AFFS marshals hoped to destroy all 3 elite mech regiments, significantly reducing Maximilian Liao's ability to defend his realm and clearing the way for the rest of Operation Rat. Orders were being passed by the Pony Express system on courier vessels to avoid revealing anything to Comstar. Though effective at concealing plans, the system couldn't hope to keep up with the fast battlefield action. And this meant that commanders at the scene would have to develop strategy. Invasion plans, some of them mapped out months in advance, were not carved in stone, and the prince expected his marshals to improvise whenever necessary. Aldebaran. The 4th Deneb Light Cavalry RCT, the 4th Guards RCT, and Redfield's Renegades approached Aldebaran knowing that they would be facing the extremely skilled House Ijuri mech regiment and 16 regiments of armour and infantry. The original plan was for both RCTs to land on the planet's northern continent and grind the enemy down. Upon receiving intelligence reports that House Ijuri had split their regiments between the planet's 2 continents, Marshal Eugene Drivers, commander of the 4th Guards RCT and leader of the invasion, decided to split his troops, sending the 4th Deneb RCT to the southern continent. Despite stiff resistance from Liao aerospace fighters, which met the 2 fleets of dropships just as they were entering orbit, the drops were successful. The only major drop casualty occurred when a Liao thrush, spewing smoke from where a Davian Stuka had riddled it, crashed into a dropping Deneb Leopard dropship. The 4th Guards Mech Regiment, the 1st Bellevue Armoured Regiment, and 2 battalions of the 17th Kestrel Mechanized Infantry chose daring drop zones near the 1st Battalion of House Ijuri, who were stationed near the important Aldebaran city of Chochu. Despite outnumbering the Capellan mechs 3-1, the Davian mechs gained little ground during the initial fighting. The 1st Bellevue Regiment, which dropped to the east of the mechs, was now driving their new Patton tanks over the vulnerable infantry defenders and into Chochu. When the mechs of House Ijuri heard that the city had fallen, they withdrew to the west and left Aldebaran aboard dropships that had been hidden in a thick forest. Davian losses here were light. The 4th Deneb RCT, in the meantime, had a tougher time hunting down the 2nd Battalion of House Ijuri. The 2nd Battalion commander, Major Thomasina Fru, was distressed about the 1st Battalion's retreat off Aldebaran. Her battalion of mechs, accompanied by its elite infantry, led the 4th Deneb on a grand tour of the planet's southern continent, executing numerous ambushes that took many lives. Despite the trouble that House Ijuri created, Marshal Vernon Friedrichs, commander of the 4th Deneb, declared the continent secure by early September. Redfield's Renegades, the mercenary regiment who was supporting the 4th Deneb, was ordered off Aldebaran soon afterwards. Intercepting these orders, Major Fru decided to attack. The night before the Renegades were to leave, the mechs of House Ijuri slipped through a swamp between the 2nd Battalion of the Renegades and the 1st Battalion of the Corridon Regulars, a mechanized infantry unit, in an effort to destroy the dropships that were waiting to load the Renegades. With House Ijuri mechs rising out of the muck like hollow monsters, as one renegade warrior put it, the scattered Renegades were attacked just after midnight and were pushed back immediately. House Ijuri inflicted heavy casualties and drove the Renegades out of the swamp and toward the vulnerable dropships. Major Richardson, commander of Redfield's 2nd Battalion, had to hold on for an hour before help could arrive. No longer hindered by the swamp, the renegades stopped Hauseguri's advance 100 metres from their dropships. 4 regiments of armour and mechanised infantry arrived to surround the Capellan forces, and Major Richardson offered Major Frew a chance to surrender, which she defiantly refused. 5 hours later, the 2nd Battalion of Hauseguri was completely destroyed. When news of the fate of the 2nd Battalion and the retreating of the 1st Battalion reached other Capellan forces still on Aldebaran, organised resistance collapsed. The 4th Deneb RCT later left Aldebaran to participate in a strike against the Capellan world of Zurich, while the 4th Guards remained on Aldebaran until relieved in December. Liao. The 33rd Avalon Hussars RCT, commanded by Lieutenant General Wilson Mandela, reinforced by 3 regiments of the Blue Star Irregulars Mercenary Company, faced House Lusan's 2 battalions, the 1st Regiment of the Confederation Reserve Cavalry, and 2 battalions of Liao Reserves, Vincent's Commandos. Davian forces didn't know that a regiment of Capellan Hussars had just arrived on Liao for training. All drops were unopposed. The 1st Regiment of the Blue Star Irregulars landed on the tropical southern continent and quickly defeated Vincent's commandos. The 33rd Avalon Hussars met the Confederation Reserve Cavalry on the island continent of Anderia and forced it to retreat across the treacherous Sanji Straits to the northern continent. On the mountainous northern continent, the 2nd and 3rd Blue Star Irregulars ignored the Confederation Reserve's sudden appearance and pushed toward the Forbidden City and the mechs of House Lusan. Resistance from the planet's native population was stiff, though not unexpected, because the planet was the emotional and ancestral heartland of the Liao family. The reserve cavalry would attack the 3rd Blue Stars after a week of preparation. The 3rd, fearing that the Capellan cavalry would try to link with House Lusan, swung north and east to cut off the cavalry. The attack, led by the commander of the Blue Stars, General Mona Troy, was a success, until the general made the mistake of following the reserve cavalry in an attempt to finish them off. The cavalry lured the 3rd Blue Stars into an ambush sprung by the 2nd Regiment of the Capellan Hussars, and though the 3rd Blue Star Regular were able to withdraw, it did so without its commander, who died covering the retreat of her troops. She was last seen in a mountain pass, her Zeus mech defiantly standing up to an approaching lance of Capellan Griffins. In the meantime, the 2nd Blue Star Regulars had made contact with House Lusan, and after a night of preparation, the Blue Star let loose a withering attack that, combined with the mercenaries' heavy fighter cover, their infantry and their tank battalion, the attack destroyed the 1st Battalion of House Lusan completely. Despite the success of the 2nd Blue Star and the AFFS being no closer to the Forbidden City, the 33rd Avalon Hussars RCT would cross over the northern continent to assist, but the remaining reserve cavalry prevented it from linking up with other Davian troops. The situation would quickly worsen when elite House Lusan infantry slipped through the lines of the 2nd Blue Stars and created chaos in the enemy's rear area. When pressed by superiors to end the invasion quickly, General Mandela requested help. Redfield's renegades, who were fresh from their victory on Aldebaran, dropped behind House Lusan and entered the Forbidden City virtually unopposed. Disheartened at losing their major objective, the Capellan Hussars, along with the remaining battalion of House Lusan and a battalion of reserve cavalry, left Liao on September 25th. Commanders rewarded Redfield renegades by letting them garrison Liao. The 33rd Avalon Hussars and the Blue Star Irregulars left Liao to attack Genoa by October. Algol. The 3rd Davian Guards RCT, aided by the elite White Horse Regiment of the Eridani Light Horse Mercenaries, had the task of taking the Liao world of Algol. Their opponents were the 1st Ariana Fusiliers, a unit known for its spirit despite almost perpetual bad luck. The Fusiliers' luck didn't change during the invasion. The 3rd Guards' Aero Wing easily scattered the few Liao fighters that ventured out to meet the Davian dropships, and uneasy Marshal Herbert Hobart ordered most of his fighters back to their dropships, where they were rearmed with bombs to attack the suspected HQ of the Fusiliers' 3rd Battalion near the planet's largest city of Kolassa. Braving ground-based missile batteries, the Guards' fighters, mostly Corsairs, seared across the planet at extremely low altitude. Marshal Hobart's suspicions were correct. the Davian fighters found the Fusiliers' entire aero wing fueling and arming at 2 airports and destroyed the Capellan fighters, most of which never had the chance to leave the ground. The White Horse, a mixed regiment, was the first to hit the dirt near the city of Groffa's Toil. The drop zone was a few kilometres west of the city's spaceport. This surprised the 2nd Battalion of the Fusiliers, which had been waiting 10 kilometres farther west. The White Horse Regiment then surprised the defenders further by ignoring the chance to strike at the rear, instead marching toward the spaceport. The Fusiliers didn't know that the elite mercenary unit were leaving its tanks in covered and protected positions along the way. The Fusiliers, who were rushing to catch up after being surprised, left their caution behind and raced for the spaceport, and by the time the Fusiliers caught sight of the deserted spaceport, the White Horse mechs had already executed a swift circle manoeuvre that placed them in a perfect position to slam into the Capellan mechs as they emerged into the empty tarmac. 5 hours later, the personnel of the White Horse Regiment were sifting through the debris of the 2nd Battalion of the Fusiliers, looking for salvage. The 3rd Guards fell on the 1st Battalion of the Fusiliers, who were stationed near Algol city of Shan. Major Torman Liao was in command of the Fusiliers and was eager to show his skills as an open-field strategist. Marshal Hobart, however, never gave him a chance to manoeuvre, wasting no time in closing with the enemy and slugging it out. Not only did the 3rd Guards close assault the Fusiliers, but once Marshal Hobart's command company had punched and kicked its way into the HQ and communications area of the enemy, he ordered an artillery barrage on that position. The rain of long tom and sniper shells was devastating. When it was over, the battalions of Fusiliers was no longer a fighting unit. The few survivors fled to the forest and Torman Liao was not found. The 3rd Battalion of the Ariana Fusiliers stationed on the eastern continent retreated off Algol without firing a single shot when it heard what had happened to the others. The 3rd Guards RCT didn't see action again until October, when it left for Ningpo, and this gave Marshal Hobart and his command company a chance to recover from their injuries. The White Horse Regiment later played a vital role in Operation Ambush. New Hessen. New Hessen is a world crisscrossed with vast plains and mountains that the planetary government rented to the Capellan military to use for major war games and manoeuvres. This meant that 4 or 5 major mech regiments were usually training on the planet. Careful planning by the AFS caught the Capellans with only 2 light mech regiments, the 1st and 2nd New Hessen Irregulars, house troops of the planet's owner. The Irregulars were extremely proud and confident that they could repel any invasion. The invading force consisted of the 1st and 2nd New Iverson Chasseurs, under the dual command of Marshal Nicholas Stevenson and Colonel Reginald Stevenson. These two were house troops of an extremely proud family and eager to prove themselves. Despite the Irregulars' zeal and familiarity with their own world, they couldn't hope to stand up to the superior New Iverson Chasseurs. The 1st Irregulars thought that they could outmaneuver the 1st Chasseurs on the open plains of Joesburg Flats, but the larger number of Davian fighters easily pinned down the Capellans until the Chasseur mechs arrived. The 2nd Hessen Irregulars chose to fight the 2nd Chasseurs in the capital city of Buchwald, and this was a fatal error, because the Chasseurs specialized in the deadly hide-and-seek of urban combat. Of the 2 regiments of New Hessen Irregulars that began the battle, only a mech battalion, an infantry company, and some artillery were able to retreat off-world. The 1st Regiment of the New Iverson Chasseurs later participated in the fight for Alresha. Pleione. The 2 mercenary mech regiments of the 2nd Screaming Eagles, commanded by Colonel Walter Hokala, got the call to capture the dry world of Pleione. The 3rd Battalion of McCrimmon's light cavalry was stationed in and around a massive tabletop mountain that Star League Defence Forces had fashioned into a HQ and supply depot for a battlemech regiment. And though the fortress was ancient, empty, and falling to pieces, the Capellan Mech Battalion had taken it over, calling it Thunder Rock. Despite the natural defensive positions provided by the imposing Thunder Rock, the Screaming Eagles expected the superior numbers would overwhelm the light cavalry. Eagle aerospace fighters reported catching most of the 3rd Battalion out in the open and mauling the unit. Everyone expected that the battle would soon be over, but the surviving Capellans retreated to the fortress, and after 3 frustrating weeks, the efforts to crack it were finally successful when a battalion of Eagles was lifted to the top of the mountain, where it found an entrance and then began fighting its way down. One of the two remaining McCrimmon companies tried to flee through a side entrance but were caught and utterly destroyed. The remaining company of McCrimmon's light cavalry surrendered. The rest of the planet was subdued easily. 2 battalions of the Screaming Eagles were left to garrison the world, while the rest went on to invade Gansing. The 2 battalions were reunited with the rest of the Eagles in time to strike at New Canton. Poznan. Gamma and Delta regiments of the 12th Vegan Rangers, commanded by Colonel Vella Delacroix, had no difficulties in surrounding and subduing the 6 regiments of lightly armed militia on Poznan. The 3rd Battalion of the 2nd Ariana Fusiliers, normally based there, had been shifted to defend the important world of Tikhonov in response to the Davian manoeuvres. Seizing on a quirk, Colonel Delacroix used her ancestry to win the confidence of the planet's Spanish minority, which had suffered considerably under the planet's Chinese population. After receiving permission from her superiors, Colonel Delacroix allowed the Spanish minority to form a provisional government and gave the militia's captured weapons to the new rulers. With a loyal militia, there was no longer any need to garrison the world, and both regiments of Vegan Rangers left Poznan to participate in the fight for Buchlau. St. Andre. St. Andre was the scene of the heaviest fighting during the first wave. Marshal Jonathan Riffenberg commanded the invasion force, which consisted of the Davian Light Guards RCT and the Alpha and Beta regiments of the 12 Vegan Rangers. Marshal Riefenberg knew he would be facing a smaller, though formidable array of Capellan forces. Justinia's Cuirassiers, Cochrane's Goliaths, and the 1st Battalion of the Black Wind Lancers. For the Alpha Regiment of the 12 Vegan Rangers, the fight began quietly enough. The 3 battalions had drop zones on a wide plain near the city of Jerome, where Justinia's Cuirassiers waited. The elite mechs of the Cuirassiers did nothing as the Vegan Rangers carefully approached Jerome and then surrounded the city. Neither side seemed willing to do anything more than just skirmish for the first 2 weeks. The Rangers sent 2 battalions south in answer to desperate pleas from Beta Regiment's training battalion, which was under attack from the Capellan Blackwind Lancers. The departure of 2/3 of the Rangers surrounding Jerome was Colonel Justinia Gordon's signal to attack. Her forces poured from the city and attacked the outnumbered battalion of Vegan Rangers. It was a ruse. The 2 battalions of Rangers did not travel too far, and the 1st Battalion fought a holding action until the arrival of the other battalions, plus reinforcements from the Light Guards RCT and the Vegan Rangers Beta Regiment. The fight, though bitter, was hopeless for Colonel Gordon, who reluctantly surrendered after losing half of her weapons and a third of her personnel. The key to the successful ambush was that the Blackwind Lancers had indeed struck at the base camp of the Vegan Rangers Beta Regiment. Instead of finding a battalion of recruits who were guarding the area, they found the 3rd Battalion of the Davian Light Guards Mech Regiment, hardly a collection of green recruits. And though the Blackwind Lancers were skilled fighters, they did not recover from this shock. Pushed back to a stretch of desert, a few of the Lancers did attempt to run across it to freedom, only to discover that the dunes had been mined. The remaining Blackwind Lancers surrendered. The Light Guards then moved the HQ of the Blackwind Lancers, and once there, Colonel Faux Christen negotiated the surrender of the unit's administration and communication staff. Using codes and communications procedures found on the base, members of the Light Guards filled Capellan radio channels with false battle reports. These reports completed the ruse that lured Gordon's Cuirassiers from the safety of Jerome. The fighting on the frozen plains of the planet's northern continent was the toughest faced by any Davian force during the first wave. The regiments of the Davian Light Guards, minus the 3rd Battalion of the Mechs Regiment, dropped near a recent excavation that AFFS military intelligence had identified as a Star League base, unearthed by the Confederation. Cochrane's Goliaths, a battalion composed mostly of the very deadly 4-legged Goliath battle mech, was defending the site. Davian military intelligence, though normally quite thorough, overlooked the Capellan Aerospace Battalion assigned with the Goliaths. The fury of the Liao fighters played havoc with the drops of the Davian Light Guards, and the 2nd Battalion of the Guards and their regiment grounded more than 30 kilometres to the north, separated from the 1st Battalion. Cochrane's Goliaths immediately divided the 2 Davian mech units and began to grind them down. The 1st Battalion faced a withering attack from 2 companies of Capellan Goliaths, and Colonel Stone, commander of the Davian Mech Regiment, ordered the 1st Battalion to retreat and attempted to divert to Delta Company, which was just about to hit their drop zone. Delta Company was unique. It was created by Prince Hans Davian and was twice the size of a normal mech company, and was trained to use its light and medium machines as a close assault group. Captain Redburn, feigning communications problems, ignored Colonel Stone's order to abort and instead grounded his troops behind Cochrane's Goliaths. In the ensuing melee, the mechs of Redburn's Delta Company closed swiftly with the slower Goliaths. Delta Company's numbers allowed it to gang up on any individual Capellan mech. The first attacks would down 5 Goliaths, but Redburn's company was in danger of being overwhelmed the longer the battle continued. Captain Redburn saw the Goliath of Fiona Cochrane, commander of the Capellan forces, and in what has been described as a courageous stroke of battlefield genius, or as the action of a madman, Captain Redburn executed what is now known as death from above, which sent his fire starter crashing down onto the cockpit of Cochrane's mech. Both were destroyed. Captain Redburn survived, however, though he was knocked unconscious and didn't participate further in the battle. Demoralized without their leader, the rest of the Goliaths fell back. Delta Company, believing that Redburn had sacrificed his life for them, was filled with vengeance. Colonel Stone used the initiative to rally the rest of his regiment to an attack that destroyed the remaining Capellan mechs. Above this scene, Davian fighters were asserting their dominance in the air. After the destruction of Cochrane's Goliaths, organized resistance on St. Andre crumbled. The Davian Light Guards RCT and 2 Vegan Rangers regiments remained on St. Andre. Delta Company of the Davian Light Guards went to Hunan to help the Aragon borderers suppress enemy activity on that Capellan world. Shensi. The 1st Davian Guards RCT, commanded by Marshal Stephen Davian, faced only a poorly armed planetary militia on Shensi. The planet was secured quickly, despite the desperate tactics of the militia's commander. The 1st Davian Guards detached an armour battalion and an infantry battalion to garrison the world. The rest of the RCT went on to attack Sitsang during the second wave of attacks. Styk. Styk, besides being Colonel Pavel Rydzik's private domain, was a major trade centre for the Capellan Confederation. The planet was also the Confederation's second largest industrial centre, with major steel and technical factories in the planet's 10 big cities. The most important industry on Styk was Tau Mech Works, the 3rd largest battle mech manufacturer in the Confederation, which was returning to production after receiving extensive damage in a 3025 Davian raid. The capture of the mech factory and other industries was an obvious priority for the AFFS. Agents from the Ministry of Intelligence, Investigations and Operations, or MIO, played important roles in the capture of Styk. In a series of bombings and assassinations, the operatives struck at the planet's air and space traffic control centers to prevent Styk's large fighter wing from intercepting the incoming dropships of the 20th Avalon Hussars RCT and the Davian Heavy Guards RCT approaching the planet. Davian fighters easily swept aside the disorganized Capellan fighter response, and the Hussars hit their drop zones on time and intact. Defending the planet were the 3rd Battalion of the 4th Confederation Reserve Cavalry and a battalion of mechs and 1 of infantry from the elite House Fujita. The Avalon Hussars took advantage of the inexperienced warriors of the Reserve Cavalry. By retreating in apparent disarray, the Hussars easily lured the mechs of the cavalry into a classic ambush scenario. With mechs in front and on both sides, with Hussar tanks to the rear, the Reserve Cavalry were surrounded. After twice being repulsed in attempts to break through the line of tanks, the remaining warriors of the Reserve Cavalry would shut down their mechs and surrender. Battle mechs and infantry from the Heavy Guards RCT surrounded the city where the infantry battalion of House Fujita was stationed. Elite Special Forces infantry would then enter the city to root out these Capellan soldiers. During the battle, a few House Fujita troops tried to retreat from the city, only to be cut down by the mechs, and after a week, the infantry battalion was completely destroyed. The mech battalion of House Fujita, realizing it was grossly outnumbered after the demise of the infantry battalion, dispersed across the countryside and adopted hit-and-run tactics. The Heavy Guards reacted by using aerospace fighters to hunt down and destroy the mechs, many Capellans surviving, however, and continuing to hit vulnerable Davian targets. Field Marshal Rand Felsner, now running behind on his timetable, ordered the entire Guards mech regiment and a tank regiment into the Durbar forest to hunt down the Capellan mechs. The surviving House Vegeta mechs retreated to an Overlord dropship that they'd hidden early in the fighting, the dropship lifting out of its forest hideaway, suddenly exploding in a tremendous fireball. It turns out that a Mio operative who was posing as a ship's engineer had sabotaged the ship's reactor shield to collapse at a critical moment. The forest fire created by the explosion would burn for days. The planet fell the following week. After elite jump troops from the Heavy Guards prevented a militia unit from blowing up the Tau mech works, the operation was considered a rousing success because the AFS had seized Styk without significantly harming its industrial and trade facilities. The 20th Avalon Hussars left 2 mech battalions and armour and an infantry battalion to garrison Styk, while the rest of the forces were withdrawn to participate in Operation Ambush. First Wave Overview. Reports from the front painted an unexpectedly successful picture of the assaults. AFS marshals were pleasantly surprised. Surviving Capellan units involved in the first wave had, on average, lost nearly a third of their forces, and many units, like Cochrane's Goliaths, had been wiped out or had surrendered. Davian losses, on the other hand, were half of what had been expected. A pleased and optimistic Prince Hansa would authorize the next phase of the operation on September 15th, 3028. On the Capellan side, the feeling was of wounded relief. After the initial devastating invasions by the Federated Suns, the Capellans thought the worst was over. Their best strategists confidently told Chancellor Liao that more major invasions would be extremely unlikely. They assumed that the Davian jump ships had left the invasion sites to return to the Federated Suns for repairs, a common procedure. Even if Prince Hansa was preparing a second wave of invasions, the Capellan strategist said it would be a much more modest one, and more designed to support the initial 9 target worlds. They underestimated the number of jump ships at the Prince's disposal, and his resolve to use even severely strained jump ships from the first wave to strike a telling blow. They also underestimated the Prince's daring. In his mind, the first wave was but the simple beginning.